about the category.
No, maybe that was good that I didn't make it on there. So Darwin came up with this idea sort of gradually as he went on this journey, and even after he came back to England. And he never used the word evolution back then. That was a more recent term to describe what he said. But he came up with this descriptor called descent with modification. Modification. Which is saying that current species are derived from more ancient ancestors. Over time. Current species are derived from more ancient ancestors over time. He called that descent with modification. And as Darwin sort of worked on this theory, he realized the implications that it would have for Christianity and was quite worried about it. So he did not publish this stuff. He sort of kept it to himself. Still continued working on the theory kind of quietly, but he would go to scientific meetings of those days. They did have scientific meetings of those days. And there was another person named, I think this is a funny name, Alfred Russel Wallace, who had also gone on a big long-distance journey and spent most of his time in Asian islands. And Darwin heard that Alfred Russel Wallace was going to publish a similar theory to his, and at that point, Darwin went ahead and published his theory, and then it created, immediate religious firestorm that continues to this day somewhat. He did not publish his theory to attack Christianity or to try to refute Genesis necessarily either. So the next thing I want to talk about is, okay, if we have the idea that offspring of an ancestral species can be naturally selected to suit their environment and then lead to different species, what would it require for that to actually happen? What would it require for that to actually happen? And so that's what these next slides are going to be about. These are the requirements for natural selection to change populations. And these are things that you should pretty much memorize and be able to list. So if this is going to happen in a way that is going to cause populations to really change, there must be more offspring than the environment can support. If everything is great and there's enough food, water, good temperature, good conditions for everyone, there won't be any differential deaths among offspring. Does that make sense? There have to be more offspring than the environment can support. There has to be a competition amongst offspring, and this also means that some number of offspring need to be dying because the environment can't support all of them, and that's kind of grim. So you need to have competition. How did that happen with the finches that the Grants studied? What was causing some of the offspring to not make it that had to do with the environment? Not enough food. There was a drought that resulted in bigger seeds being the main food source. And those bigger seeds could not support all of the finches that were there. Which finches had an easier time dealing with that environment?
With the larger beaks?
The ones with the big beaks that can peck those seeds apart. So that condition was met with the finches. Do we have I like to try and compare these to humans to make it more relevant to how we think. Do we have these conditions with humans today?
Depends where.
It does depend where. In the U.S., not too much. Not too much. We try to save all offspring here. Where could this maybe happen sometimes with humans?
Millis.
Like more like
Like
third
Congo?
world countries.
Africa.
Any place where lots of people don't make it for different reasons. So it could be because of famine, it could be because of wars, disease, yes. That actually has been a factor, one of the biggest factors in the past. Does that mean that we are moving the human population toward people who can survive wars?
No.
Not really. People are very new on the earth. So related to people's lifespan. Sometimes you will hear people talk about, well, humans are evolving to blah, blah, blah. That's a little bit hard to study on the time scale that we live in. Second requirement, this is a big deal. The offspring have to be genetically different from each other. They have to have different phenotypes that are coming from them having different genotypes. And another way to say this is that the offspring must have phenotypic differences that matter for their environment. If they're all the same, the environment doesn't really have an effect on who lives and dies, if they're all the same. They have to be genetically different. So here's an example of ladybugs that are genetically different. What could be genetically different about these that would make some of them live or die better than others?
Dots.
If their dots help them blend in more with their background and then the bird doesn't see them as well and eat them. If there happened to be one that was albino in here, that's a phenotypic difference that would not be selected for, it would be selected against. There has to be natural variation. So for the finches, their major difference that was mattering to their environment was beak size. That was literally helping them stay alive or not, depending on how big their beak was and what the dominant seed of that time was. Other examples are, if we go back to the iguana, where's my iguana picture? What type of phenotypic differences would help an iguana survive better in the water?
Like longer feet, retirement.
Only anything that would make it swim better. So longer feet, a little bit more webbing, so it could swim more efficiently.
Other something with their lungs too.
Also, their oxygen,
Something other than
things related to using oxygen. So if it could hold its breath longer,
Yeah.
if it had bigger lungs, if it had more efficient oxygen metabolism. Yeah,
And
like
the-
stuff with enzymes even, yeah.
And the tail probably.
And
Bigger
if you
tail.
got like 10% more thrust per tail flap, or whatever you call it, and that was a genetic difference that you could pass to your offspring, that meant that they could swim away from predators faster. They could swim around to find their food faster. That might make a difference in how well they survive. But if some are going to survive better than others, there need to be phenotypic differences amongst them. And the other important thing about these phenotypic differences is that these have to have a genetic cause, and they have to be inheritable. They have to be inheritable. That phenotypic difference has to come from genes that can be passed on to offspring. Oh, one more thing about this. So in the last section, we were talking about genetics and inheritance. We were talking about alleles, and that alleles are different versions of genes. And different alleles can give rise to different phenotypes. What's different between the offspring is really their alleles that cause them to have different phenotypes that allow them to survive better or worse. So, for the beak size, you got a beak this big. Well, it's such a good drawing of a beak. Or you have a beak this big, and this one helps you break open bigger seeds. This bird has a gene, at least one gene, that makes its beak be bigger. Like maybe it's something that causes its beak cells to divide more quickly. Maybe it's something that makes their beak material harder and less likely to break. There's a gene that controls that. That's what's preferentially inherited. Third requirement. There's a difference in phenotype. The environment is harsh enough that not all offspring will live. The phenotype has a genetic basis for its difference. And, this is the one people tend to forget about, and that phenotype not only just lets the organism survive, but it gives it greater reproductive success. Greater reproductive success. And, careful how I say this. In this sense, greater reproductive success is how many offspring are produced. That's what it is. Does your genetic difference that gives you a good phenotype that allows you to survive the harsh environment also let you produce more offspring? If natural selection is going to lead to big changes in populations, the genetic difference has to make you produce more offspring. If for some reason it doesn't make you produce more offspring, or it also causes you to produce less offspring, that's not going to lead to your genes being passed on to more survivors. So for these birds, why did having a big beak cause them to have more offspring than the small beak ones?
They ate more, they were like healthier.
They lived
Yeah.
because they ate more and they were healthier. And they survived to be able to reproduce. These did not. These did not. For example, if the finches, one of them had an allele that caused them to produce twice as many sperm as the other, that's going to cause you to produce more offspring probably. That would be selected for. What if you're a roach and you've got a gene that lets you survive raid? Like that pesticide raid. Not all the offspring are going to survive that harsh environment. You survive because you've got a gene that lets you do so. If your offspring get that gene, well, you survive, you're going to have more offspring. They've got the gene. Their offspring will also survive better too. And now that gene is more prevalent in the whole population. This type of stuff, make a note about this, that this also has to do with the spread of antibiotic resistance. you've read any alarming headlines like, we're gonna run out of antibiotics for common diseases because bacteria are becoming so resistant to them, this is how it happens. And we can actually measure that over a 10-year period, even, a very quick time period. Because if it lets you survive, you automatically have more differential reproductive success. Or if it just causes you to have more children, more offspring, that also will lead to that allele becoming more prevalent in the population.
So is this one saying like it's basically just having more offspring, or is it having more offspring that are surviving? Okay.
So that question that you just asked, is it just having more offspring, or is it offspring that survive? Jeff's going to be talking about that on Friday.
Okay.
I have an allele for poor verbal. But yes, it's not just you have more offspring, but if they are puny, that won't lead to speciation either, formation of new species.
Yeah.
Good question. So on Friday, and maybe partly on Wednesday, we'll be going through examples of this, more concrete examples of different organisms. Oh, this is a really good example. Okay. Was this in your book? Did you read this? I think this picture is from your book. What's a shrike? Anybody read this? Did I sign this part? This might be for Wednesday, actually.
I don't know what a shrike is.
Okay. I'm going to set this up, and then I think you're reading about it for Wednesday, but I'll tell the story of what's going on here. This is a living, flat-tailed horned lizard. This is a dead one, it's skeleton. And these live in desert environments, and they have these little horns coming out the back of their head. They have armor. One of their predators is a shrike, which is a bird, right? Yes, it's a bird. It's a type of bird. And really the only place that the bird can attack the lizard or penetrate its armor, this is amazing on its own, the birds will pick these up and then they stab them onto a thorn. This is mean and gory, but that's how the birds kill the lizard, and then later when it's dead they'll come back and eat them. So they tried to pick up the lizard right here and then impale it on the thorn. If the lizard has spikes that stick backward, that's more protective. If they stick straight up, it's less protective. So what this reading is going to be about is how researchers have determined that one of the horns has more difference in allowing survivability than the other because of how birds kill these things. So read that for Wednesday. I think that's part of your reading, to see how horn angle phenotype leads to greater survivability and then greater reproductive success because you didn't get impaled on a thorn and eaten by a bird. How horrible. How did the birds figure out how to do that? That's another cool question that we won't be talking about in here, but